On today's show, the Hawks are about to head to Las Vegas for their opener in Summer League on Friday. Landry Fields talked to the media on Wednesday for the first time in a while. There's a bunch of news to get to. We'll get into all of that and much more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1763 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep into the night on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And today's podcast sponsored by the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out anywhere you find podcasts. That includes Apple, Spotify, Overcast on the audio side, as well as YouTube on the video side. And if you're watching on YouTube, please go ahead and like this episode, as well as subscribe to that platform. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and we'll dive in right now. I should say, I did a two-part episode a couple of days ago now, I guess a day and a half ago now or so, with Glenn Willis of ATL and 29 that I dropped on Tuesday about Summer League, kind of previewing that in deep dive fashion. That's still very relevant at this point in time. Listen to that show in both parts because the Hawks open up Summer League on Friday. Also, the Hawks had immediate availability on Wednesday with the Summer League guys, as well as Landry Fields, the general manager. And I'll have some audio at the end of this podcast from Landry Fields. But first, there's been a ton of news, and I really do mean a ton of news that has hit sort of in the last, 36 hours or so. There's basically nothing for the Hawks news-wise for about 10 days after the Dejounte Murray trade. But now it all came flooding back in the last day and a half or so, and there's sort of a busy show as a result of that. So we'll dive in right now with what is probably the biggest news of the day on Wednesday, and that's that Vit Krejci is back with the Hawks. So after a 3-month saga, basically, dating back to the Hawks not converting him from his two-way contract at the end of the regular season, which is certainly controversial. It was 3 months ago now, but that made him ineligible to play in the play-in game against the Bulls. That was not the best thing for the Hawks to try to win in that moment, but it did, of course, lead in sort of a roundabout way to the Hawks losing and then also having the lottery success that they had. And then Krejci finished the year on a two-way contract. That made Krejci's qualifying offer to be restricted free agent another two-way contract. And that made that an absolute no-brainer. And he's been a restricted free agent for about 2 weeks now. I've been saying really for the entire time that it was always extremely likely that he'd be back with the Hawks on a multi-year contract. And that came to pass on Wednesday. Woj reported on Wednesday afternoon that Krejci agreed to a 4-year contract worth about $10 million. I've had that confirmed since then by the Hawks. Not that Woj needs my help to confirm reports, but that is the case. The Hawks have not announced that just yet as I'm recording this podcast at, 2 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday morning, but that is going to be coming probably on Thursday from the Hawks side. As far as details are concerned, it's kind of sparse right now. Even several hours after the initial news broke, let's just say the roundabout way that I've heard about this is basically a 4-year deal for Krejci at his minimum every season. So basically his minimum contract possible for 4 years adds up to about $10.2 million. So basically exactly what that was reported by Woj. You have to assume based on that it would kind of be his minimum all the way through. Now, the deal kind of does swing on whether there are any non-guarantees or team options or player options. And right now, again, early morning Thursday, I don't know the answer to that question. I've been trying to find out for the last few hours and I've not been able to do that. But that's important. We'll kind of follow up on that later on. But we do not know just yet if there is any sort of team favorability beyond the cheapness of the contract or if you got a player option. We will see in the coming days. As a kind of recap of where he is, Vit just turned 24 years old. It's been a mixed career so far for Vit, I have to say, but he had this really, really intriguing 20 game stretch at the end of the year. He was pushed into the action by the Hawks by injuries. He hadn't played really at all. And suddenly went from not playing at all season to starting and basically playing a lot of minutes out of necessity. But he defended at the best level of his career during that stretch. He shot it well from 3 on a pretty small sample size, I will say. But he's always had the ability to kind of dribble, put the ball on the floor and pass and play make a little bit for his size at 6'7", 6'8". His defensive growth this year is really impressive, going back to his work in College Park with the G League, a la what's happened with a lot of guys that have gone down there in the last year or so. The swing skill with Vit is probably his jump shot. He's been like a 30%-ish three-point shooter in his career so far, which is not great, of course, even going back to the G League, but he flashed more than that at the end of this year. It looked better mechanically. If that holds up, or the defense holds up, or both, ideally, this becomes a really, really good contract for the Hawks. We'll kind of go through the roster later on in the show, but in the end, I was expecting Krejci to be back on a deal kind of like this, relatively cheap, multi-year contract that's team-friendly, and that's where the Hawks ended up in this spot. Part of that is that the team had so much leverage. Unless there was another team that was like lining up to give Vít an offer sheet, which I don't think was out there for him at this point in time, that was the only way that it wouldn't be really friendly to the Hawks. They had a lot of leverage here, and that puts the player in a tough spot, I have to say. And honestly, for Vít, it's a lot of money, obviously. $10 million, if it's all guaranteed, it's a lot of money for a lot of people, but it's not a great contract for the player side. It's very team-friendly, I think, at this point in time, such as life. He'll be in a battle for playing time with guys like Reece Shea and Dyson Daniels, Garrison Matthews, et cetera, this year, but you simply put cannot have too many wings in the NBA. That's where they are at this point in time. He adds to that and has a nice, very intriguing skill set with his defense that he showed up this year with. And again, Hawks fans, I would say, have to be thrilled with this deal on the whole. The short version is if he played like he did last year, which is, again, is not a given by any means, but if he can do that over a larger sample size, this deal becomes an absolute and total heist for the Hawks. If he doesn't maintain that level, it's still so cheap that it's fine. Even if he's like the 13th guy on your team, making $2.5 million a year on average, that's totally fine. So there really is very little downside here for the Hawks. It's only upside. And again, if he's the player he was at the end of last year, which is, again, it's a big if, but if that player still exists moving forward, that'd be a very, very good outcome for the Hawks and a great contract. So overall, an excellent piece of business for the Hawks, I would say, to negotiate this pretty hard, lock Vít into multiple seasons at a very team-friendly number. Great stuff there. And for Vít, some more security that he's had before. And there you go on that. On the other side of things, news-wise, Saddiq Bey is in the news and not coming back to the Hawks. So I've talked about this for, 2 weeks now, about the Hawks and Bey still talking about bringing him back to Atlanta potentially, even after the Hawks did not give him a qualifying offer on June 29th. One reason why that actually didn't do that is because Bey might have just signed that qualifying offer for 1 year, and that would put the Hawks owing him like $8+ million for one season. And as a reminder, Saddiq tore his ACL. So he's going to be out for probably at least half or more of this season, could be the whole year, et cetera. So what you don't want to have happen if you're the Hawks is to pay a 1-year deal and have him leave at the end of it without having actually played for you. So anyway, his market was not robust because of the injury, from what I heard. But in the end, he ends up agreeing to a 3-year, $20 million contract with the Wizards. This is a far cry from what Saddiq was probably going to get without the injury. And the Hawks offered, I would say, considerably more than this. I've heard different numbers, but I would say, let's just say considerably more than this. They were offering him a year ago in an extension. There was back and forth there. The two sides could not find an agreement on a middle ground, which is not anything out of the ordinary. It does happen. Every year there's a guy or two or three or four or five that just cannot find an extension. So that's not anybody's fault. But Bey's number was higher than the Hawks' number that they were willing to give him. So all that said, fast forward a year, this is pretty unfortunate for Saddiq, as we talked about a lot. He's a guy that everybody likes, including me. He had really bad luck with the injury on top of the shooting struggles from this year in particular. But anyway, the Hawks could have given him this deal, but it would have given him a complicated tax picture. And from what I've heard, they were not really in on Bey still if the market was robust. If the market had fallen off on Saddiq like all the way, they could have brought him back at a cheap number. It would not have surprised me at all. They were still talking in the last couple of days and weeks. But anyway, this is a very modest deal if Saddiq is still the guy he was pre-injury. And I know Hawks fans sour on him this year. I understand it. He didn't play as well as he did previously. The shooting was the biggest part of that. But even as someone who was kind of early on Saddiq being a little bit overvalued by some Hawks fans a year ago, this is still a really good contract for that kind of player if he's able to play again within the next year. But I don't think the Hawks have any interest at all in paying the tax right now, from what I can gather. And this would have put them kind of in that mark. Plus, he was not restricted anymore. So even if the Hawks had offered him this contract, he might have just chosen to go to Washington because, number one, he is from there. Number two, they have a lot fewer bodies in front of him and maybe a little bit longer leash. So I don't know that to be sure, but I just keep that in mind. It was not like the Hawks could have auto-matched this on their own. Saddiq might have wanted to go somewhere else. So we'll see on that. But I could go longer on this if I wanted to, dating back the Hawks trading for him a year and a half ago, and then ultimately at the end of this, losing him for nothing. Doesn't look great. The price was 5 second-round picks. It was a lot, I would say. Not like crazy for a guy who was cheap, but it didn't work out that well for anybody involved. I am happy for Saddiq because he at least got some security with that $20 million given the injury stuff. Hopefully he gets healthy and gets back on the market in a couple of years, makes some more money in his career. For the Hawks side, I'm not surprised. This is kind of where things ended up. Bey getting a real offer was kind of changing things there. Again, I think the only way the Hawks were going to bring him back by the end of this is if he didn't have many other options. So they didn't match this or beat it necessarily, but I think it's at least possible, again, that he could have just wanted to go home to DC. But regardless, good for him. And the Hawks will move on without him at this point in time. And again, that's not a surprise. He was still on my radar, but I've kind of been planning that it was more likely than not that he would not be back for the Hawks. And now we know he's not going to be back for the Hawks. He's heading to Washington. The Hawks will see him 4 times a year as long as he's with the Wizards. Okay, we'll have more coming up, and there's plenty more news. Bruno Fernando, Seth Lundy, EJ Liddell, etc., and then Landry Fields stuff at the end of the podcast with some audio from today's media availability. But first, a word from our friends at Gametime. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. They also help to get your baseball and basketball tickets faster and easier with last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest possible price guarantee. That all makes Gametime a fantastic option to make things easy for you when buying tickets. I've been using them for quite some time over at Gametime in the app there, and it really has come in handy for me a ton of different times looking for tickets for the Braves, or the Falcons, Atlanta United, as well as shows and concerts across the city. At Gametime also, you could save really big with buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and much more. And they have flash deals where you can actually save even more and save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats for you within that section. They have an awesome feature as well where you can actually toggle to show the total up front with no surprise fees. We get to the checkout screen at the very end. And you get a panoramic review of your seats in the app before you buy them. So you actually know exactly what you're going to be getting into when you get inside that venue, and you're always getting the lowest possible price with the folks at Gametime. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets today with the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and you redeem that promo code. It is LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we dive back in now with Bruno Fernando. Bruno originally, of course, had a June 29th deadline to have his contract be guaranteed by the Hawks for the upcoming season. The two sides then mutually agreed to push that number back to Wednesday, July 10th, which was, of course, yesterday as I'm recording this, or at least as you're hearing it. Wednesday the 10th was now the new deadline for Bruno. In the time between those two deadlines, about a week and a half, 2 weeks, the Hawks, of course, acquired Cody Zeller in the Dejounte Murray trade. And Zeller is not a great player or anything, but he is on a guaranteed contract for $3.5 million this coming season, which is sort of a wrinkle in addition to the fact that, again, the Hawks have Capella, Okongwu, and Larry Nance all at Bruno's position. So Landry earlier today, or yesterday, as you're listening to this podcast, talked about how the Hawks were working with Bruno's side to push back that guarantee date potentially during his presser. A few hours later, I was actually the one that broke this news that Bruno's guarantee date is going to be August 1st now. So that's 3 weeks from now. What does this mean? So on the practical side, it means that Bruno is on a non-guaranteed contract now for 3 more weeks, and that gives the Hawks flexibility, nothing else. On the more theoretical side, it can mean a lot of things, but not necessarily anything in particular. My read right now is that the Hawks did not want to cut Bruno today, or they would have. But they're also wary of having 5 centers on guaranteed contracts. They don't want to have that happen, basically, at this point in time. So they kind of have to, something's got to change at center for the Hawks, meaning, again, at least one of the four centers who are under contract kind of have to be gone for the Hawks to bring back Bruno, I think. I shouldn't say I know, but I think. So they went to Bruno, and then this is, again, me theorizing or reading into this. They went back to Bruno and said, let's push this back a little bit, kick it down the road a little bit, and then give themselves 3 more weeks to kind of figure out the rotation at center. On Bruno's side, people were asking me why he would agree to this, because it's not a one-way decision. As a reminder, this is a mutual decision. The player has to agree to push this date back. And basically only he could answer that, but it's a combination of 2 different things, I think. Number one, he could just really like it in Atlanta and want to stay. Bruno's very popular in Atlanta. Quinn likes him a lot, all that stuff. Like he's a fan favorite, he's a locker room favorite, etc. Or like I should say, or number 2, his agent does not have a ready-made landing spot for Bruno right now if the Hawks were to cut him. Because if Bruno, let's just say, had a deal waiting for him somewhere else for the minimum even, the Hawks cutting him would actually probably help him because then he would actually get guaranteed contract, etc. But I would guess that probably is not the case based on what we've seen so far information-wise. So they're kind of playing along here in hopes that he will stick around and have that $2.7 million that he has non-guaranteed right now become guaranteed in a few weeks. For the Hawks, everybody's asking basically what this all means, and it's not as clear as people want it to be, honestly, on any side of this thing. It does not mean they're definitely trading Clint or definitely trading Capella and Clint, Zeller or Nance, etc. It just means that the Hawks prefer not to cut Bruno if they don't have to, but again, they don't want to be on the hook for 5 centers, is my read on things right now. So I'm pretty sure I said this last time, he was going to guarantee or not guarantee 2 weeks ago, but I think Bruno will be around in Atlanta if they can find a way to move on from one of the other guys, at least one of the other guys. If not, they probably have to cut him just for roster reasons. Also, I should at least note this, that the Hawks pushing this back would actually let them be able to trade him if they wanted to. I'm not saying I've heard that, but it's at least a possibility. And by the way, they have to guarantee his deal to trade him. That's what happened with with Cody Zeller, is that basically, the Pelicans had to pay him guaranteed money that's now on the Hawks books to be able to trade him. So that's one potential that Bruno's agent could be thinking about, is that if the Hawks wanted to move on from Bruno via trade, that would get Bruno paid, if nothing else. So we'll see. For now, what we know is the Hawks have kicked the can down the road, basically, for 3 more weeks. So August 1st, circle that, and then we'll follow this throughout the month of July. But that's the latest on Bruno. Further down the roster here, Seth Lundy had some news break on Tuesday, actually, that he's back on a 2-way contract. I've referred to this as kind of the most logical outcome for a while now on the podcast, because Lundy, as Vit Krejci did, ended the season on a 2-way contract. His qualifying offer was only another 2-way. But he's also hurt right now. He's rehabbing from ankle surgery that he had on May 1st to remove a bone spur in that ankle. So in addition to all of the other stuff, there's some roster challenges right now for the Hawks. Of course, they're very full roster crunch-wise, as we'll get into later on in the podcast. But the team could kind of keep Lundy around very conveniently by having him be on a 2-way. That's what's the case right now. The Hawks now only have 2 empty 2-way spots instead of 3. As a reminder, Lundy's not going to play in Summer League because of the injury, but he should be ready to go for training camp in October. I've always liked Seth quite a lot. He had a late first-round grade on him for me in the draft a year ago. Good value pick for me in the 40s where they got him. I still think that he's a guy that can kind of shoot and defend potentially for Atlanta. Not a super high ceiling player, but someone on a 2-way contract is totally viable for you, adds extra depth. I think you could play if you needed to. So not exactly a high profile move here, but notable that he's back with the Hawks on a 2-way and they have some more work to do with the roster. Speaking of that, roster reset here. As a rule in the NBA, you can have as many as 20 players on your roster during the summer. But when October runs around, basically when you get to the season, you have to have 15 guys or fewer on full contracts and then up to 3 2-ways. Right now, the Hawks have a roster crunch, which Landry got into a lot earlier today on Wednesday. But just to lay it out here, they have 14 guys right now on guaranteed contracts. They have Trey and Kobe at guard. They have Bogey, they have Daniels and Vit Krejci. They have Jalen and DeAndre Hunter and Reese Shea, Mogay, EJ Liddell at forward. And then they have Capella, Okongwu, Nance, and Zeller at center. That's 14 guys on guaranteed contracts. Then they have 2 guys on non-guarantees. That is Bruno Fernando and Garrison Matthews, who they want to keep, I'm confident, but he's still technically non-guaranteed as of right now. So that's 16 guys right there. You can't have more than 15 when the season begins. So that means just by math, someone's got to be gone between now and October that's on one of those 16 guys. Then you still have Jurisic, who is a second-round pick. The Hawks obviously like. They just drafted him. He's not signed to anything right now. He could be on a 2-way. He could be on a full contract still, theoretically. He could be on a stash overseas. We will see, but that's a guy to keep an eye on. And then you have Lundy on a 2-way. So that's basically it right now. I won't do a full deep dive at the moment because the Hawks are functionally right now under the luxury tax. As I said before earlier on this podcast, I would now be pretty darn surprised if they paid the tax. No one believes that they're going to. Their moves kind of tell that story as well. They are hard capped at the first apron. That's above the tax. So if they're not going to pay the tax, that doesn't really come into play. People ask me about a lot recently, like, what does this mean, hard cap? And like theoretically, basically, it doesn't really matter unless you think the Hawks were going to pay above that anyway. And by the way, they were not going to pay above that. So it doesn't actually matter that much what's happening there. But technically right now they have, if you combine all 16 guys, if you were to guarantee Bruno and guarantee Garrison, they'd be slightly over the tax, but they would not do that because they have 16 players if that happens. So functionally, they're under the tax, albeit barely, and then we'll see what happens from there. Last thing before we flip it over to Landry and get out of here on this very late edition of the podcast. By the way, I covered Team USA against Team Canada out here in Las Vegas. This is probably the latest recording I've done in a while because it's now past 2 a.m. Eastern. Granted, I'm on Pacific time right now, which is probably helpful, but I'm still kind of gassed at this point in time. So here we are. Anyway, before we get out of here, I previewed Summer League extensively with Glenn on that 2-part episode earlier this week, which again, listen to that show. It focuses heavily on Risa Shea and Jurisic and Buffkin and Mo Gay, Dylan Windler, etc. And now they have a 6th guy that's on their roster radar that's going to be playing Summer League, EJ Liddell. So the Hawks added Liddell to the roster on Wednesday. I reported that first, I believe, so that's always fun, having some news breaking. But Liddell was, if you missed it, in the Dejounte Murray trade, which is how he got to the Hawks. He's on a guaranteed contract. He's 23 years old, about $2.1 million this year. It's almost basically the minimum for him. And the Hawks have a cheap team option on him for the following year as well, if they like him, which is not decided until next summer. But a second-round pick of the Pelicans 2 years ago, he actually had he tore up his knee basically in a Summer League game. I was actually at that game. It was against the Hawks 2 years ago. But he recovered, played a little bit this last year with New Orleans, his G League team especially, played 29 games in Birmingham, averaged 17 and 8. He was productive there. Played at Ohio State, prominent guy in college, kind of a bulky power forward type, listed at 242 pounds, 6'7" in shoes. So like definitely not like the biggest guy in the world height-wise, but certainly bulky and physical. A real prospect at one point in time out of Ohio State for sure. We'll see how he looks now after the knee injury and kind of a year away from that. But we'll see on his jump shot as well. I've kind of asked around New Orleans, like that's the big swing skill it seems like for Liddell is whether his shot goes in from the perimeter. But him being at Summer League is pretty darn interesting because it's just another guy to keep an eye on, another guy that they're probably going to want to play. You know, the Hawks have a pretty good luxury here. Most teams that I've covered in Summer League only have 2 or 3 guys on them that actually really matter for the team. This time, the Hawks have 4 already. Windler is kind of on the fringe of that, but was on the team last year for a while and is a real NBA player, I think. And then Liddell. So that's 6 right there of guys who like actually could matter. And that's a lot more than you usually would see. But I don't know, for Hawks fans, I'm sure there'll be some reactions either positively or negatively about Liddell because they haven't seen him play a lot. But he's now on the team on a guaranteed contract. So keep an eye on him for sure over the next week and a half in Las Vegas. Also of note, the Hawks added Mokhtar Gay to the Summer League roster. No relation to Mo Gay. Keep that in mind. No relation to Mo Gay, although he's also from Senegal, so I'm sure that'll be confused for some people, but they're not related. Mokhtar is a 27-year-old center. He played college at UAB a few years ago, has played some pro ball since then. I noted on the pod with Glenn and then even before that the Hawks only had 1 true center on their Summer League roster, so this is probably just a depth move on some level. I don't think he's a huge prospect. Again, 27 years old, not really been close to the NBA before, so just another name out there. Not really a prospect, but we'll have plenty of Summer League talk in the coming days. But just to say this out loud, most of it will focus on the guys who are on the team. But if someone breaks out, I'll talk about it for sure. We'll kind of give that thorough breakdown as you're probably used to doing on this show. And I'm trying to piece it all together tech-wise from Las Vegas, from hotels and all that fun stuff. So bear in mind, I'll be doing all of that in the near future. Anyway, that's all I have on the news portion. And again, it was a lot going on here. I'm sure I'll clarify some more stuff in the future with mailbags and kind of news and notes, stuff like that. But between the Krejci deal happening and Bruno's will they or won't they routine, Saddiq leaving, Seth Lundy's contract, like there's a lot going on in Hawks land right now. And then hopefully that covers it all. It all happened really fast. And then we'll get into more later on if we need to. Before we get out of here on today's podcast, though, a word from our partners. And after that, we'll have a little bit of audio from Landry Fields as he talked to the media on Wednesday about a lot of different things, including the Dejounte Murray trade. Again, but first, a word from our partners on today's podcast. All right, before we get out of here, some audio from Wednesday's press conference from Landry Fields, who spoke to the media for the first time since he actually made the Dejounte Murray trade. It's been about, a week and a half, 2 weeks since he talked after the draft, and a lot has happened, of course, since then. Of course, a lot of focus was on the Dejounte deal and what led to that, et cetera. And the first question came from Lauren Williams of the AJC about that, and here's what Landry had to say about trading Dejounte to New Orleans.
So, of course, Dejounte, you guys had him for a couple of years. What went into the decision that now was the time that you guys wanted to, go in a different direction?
Just evaluating where we're at. It was a hard decision. It was challenging. We knew that where we ultimately want to be was going to require some challenging decisions. Just not being at that point currently where we felt like we can continue on with what we have. So, wanted to reshape some things, and this is an unfortunate part of the business. Dejounte is a fantastic player, but we're excited for him and his journey on in New Orleans. But we're also very excited about the guys that we got back. Got a few assets with it too, which are going to be helpful for us to continue to build. So, I wish him nothing but the best. He and his family have been great with us.
Later in the availability, not right after, but pretty soon after, Caleb Johnson, 929, asked a follow-up about the Dejounte process and kind of whether it was a failure to trade for him in the first place back when the Hawks did that 2 years ago.
When you have to make a move like trading Dejounte, given the fact that you made a trade for him just a couple of years ago, do you look at that as a failure, or how do you kind of view it?
Not at all. I absolutely not. I look at it as, at the time we had an opportunity to go get a really good player, and for where we're at, we wanted to take a chance to make it to the next level of what we were trying to do at that point in time. I think that at this point, right, it's the kind of what I said earlier, it's now faced with another challenging decision in moving him. But no, I don't see it as a failure at all, especially when you look at that and go, okay, what are some things that we learned from that? What are things that worked out well? What are things that didn't work out well? But I think going back, we would definitely take that risk again.
This is me talking now, but some of this is that Landry has to say that it's not a failure. Some of it's GM speak, which Landry is not afraid of doing by any means. The part that he says about taking the risk again is one that I don't agree with, because I just don't think it was good process in the first place. And it was obviously poor results to the point where it went even worse than I thought it was going to go. And someone who didn't love the trade when it happened. But even if they thought they wouldn't do it again, he probably wouldn't say that. So no huge surprise there. But I wanted to at least share with you Landry's first thoughts on the record since the Dejounte trade. Elsewhere in the availability, Kevin Chouinard of Hawks.com and ATL29, a good friend of mine, asked Landry how he feels about Dyson Daniels and that acquisition and sort of what he brings to the team. And then you'll also hear Kevin's voice in the middle of his answer with a follow-up to Landry.
I feel great about him. He's playing with his national team for the Olympics, so it's been good for him. And feedback that we've gotten and the amount of film and in-person studying that we've done of him as a player really fits like what we're looking to do more and more of. So couldn't be more thrilled. Like, we're excited about his talent and his fit for us.
What about his game are you particularly excited to get?
His defensive versatility is something that really stands out. His shooting has gotten better. It's something that we think we can get an uptick in him as time goes on with his development. So if we're able to help him stay the course defensively and then give him some offensive adjustments there, turns to a real player.
Earlier in the podcast today, I mentioned that Seth Lundy is going to be back with the Hawks on a 2-way contract. Later, got a question about that and his return, about Lundy overall, and here's what he had to say about Seth.
Yeah, for him, it was unfortunate with injury. It'd be great for him to have played Summer League, but these things happen. A guy that at the time when he first had that injury last season was really the trajectory kind of looking up on what he was able to do, especially shooting the basketball, and the development that he had in the G League for College Park, I thought was great. So just for a guy in what we're doing, just going to continue to develop him. So he's hungry, he's gritty as a player, and I know he wants it too. So we'll be excited when he gets back from injury.
Those are kind of the big newsy things. There were a couple of different exchanges. It's kind of just very much GM platitudes from Landry, as he is often going to do. Part of that's the job, and he's also very good at kind of talking in a circle whenever he needs to. No real specifics on next plans, as you might imagine. You got a question about center depth at Capella in particular, and he kind of said it was an ongoing evaluation, that they still find value in Clint. Nothing really revelatory there. So that's kind of where I'll leave it on sort of the news front. He did note a roster crunch that they're facing right now, which obviously I talked about quite a while now. I think the words that Landry used were, quote, some more tough decisions to make, end quote. But obviously I've been talking about this for 2 weeks now, basically, that they have these 4 centers, maybe 5 centers, all those back and forth, and not going to be able to kind of start the season like this. So plus Vit's hanging out there, et cetera, et cetera. The last bit of audio that I'll share with you before we get out of here on this Wednesday into Thursday is that Landry, you got a question about what he's looking for from Risache and Jurisic in Summer League. And here's what he had to say about his 2 draft picks going to Las Vegas.
Get more and more integrated, accustomed to actually playing a new style of basketball. I mean, it's one thing to go from college to the NBA, but coming from 2 completely different countries and playing at this system, I was talking with Juka earlier about it. He's like, there's so much spacing, there's so much things that your potential out there. I'm like, yeah, man, you'll have at it. Those are all new things for them. So I think it's just making sure that we're supporting them and integrating them into our system, into our way of doing things, and then just go out and competing. But those are all things that I'm not worried about, because that was part of our process and assessments during the draft process, is making sure those were covered. Like, we didn't have to worry about those things, and those guys have it.
After that, you actually got a follow-up about how long they play in Summer League. Something that's always kind of a topic is how long your guys are going to keep playing in Las Vegas. Every organization does it differently. The Hawks don't really hesitate to shut guys down necessarily, but this is a different regime, I will say. They have played more basketball recently, Ricochet and Juristich, than most college players have, so maybe a little bit of a shorter leash, but nothing committal from Landry on that, so we'll see how that all goes. On that front, before we get out of here, just a reminder, the Hawks are going to be playing 5 games in Las Vegas. 4 of them are scheduled already. The first one is on Friday evening. It's a 9:30 p.m. Eastern time start on ESPN against the Wizards. Of course, the main event there is Ricochet versus Sarr, number 1 versus number 2. All of the Alex Sarr baggage, the no workout stuff, all that stuff is, I'm sure, will be talked about a lot. I'll be in the building, so I won't be able to mercifully hear all of the way it's framed on the broadcast, but I'm sure that'll be a big topic throughout the game. But I'm also looking forward to seeing Bufkin and Juristich match up with first-round pick of the Wizards, Bub Carrington, a guy that I like quite a bit. So there is some talent on the Wizards side. The Hawks have 5-6 players that I'm pretty interested in on their side as well. So pretty good talent. The first game is always a lot of hype. And the number 1 versus number 2 in prime time on Friday. There'll be a lot going on there. So stay tuned for all of that. All right, that's all I have on today's podcast. If nothing big happens, I will probably wait and record after the game on Friday. If the Hawks make a transaction, I will jump into action between now and then. So please stay tuned. As always, please subscribe to the show. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and like this episode, as well as subscribing to the page on YouTube and telling your friends. Also, on the audio side, please subscribe to the show on Apple, on Spotify, on Overcast. Please leave 5-star ratings and reviews there as well. Follow the show on Twitter /X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Also find my written work and some extra Hawks stuff, patreon.com/BT Rowland. I very much appreciate all of your support there as well. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your week. And at the very latest, we'll see you after the game on Friday.